The morning Dorian Achibi walked out of the Edmonton courthouse with nothing but a duffel bag and his daughter's car seat. A woman in a charcoal wool coat was waiting by the curb. He almost didn't notice her. He was too busy trying to hold himself upright, one hand gripping the railing on the steps, the other pressed flat against his chest like he was checking whether his heart was still there. It was, just barely. The divorce had been finalized at 9:14 in the morning. His lawyer had shaken his hand in the hallway and said something about fresh starts. Dorian had nodded because that was the only thing left to do. He was 41 years old. He had a 6-year-old daughter named Zara who liked dinosaurs and hated loud music and slept with a stuffed walrus she'd named Gerald. He had $43 in his wallet, a temporary address at his cousin's place in Sherwood Park, and a custody arrangement that gave him Zara every other week, which meant that for the next 7 days she was with Patrice, and he was alone in a way he hadn't been since his 20s. That was what he was carrying when the woman spoke. "Mr. Achip." He stopped. She said his name the way people said names when they already knew a great deal about you. Carefully, like something fragile. She was perhaps 45, though she carried it the way certain people do, as though age had agreed to be generous with her. Dark hair, silver at the temples, a posture that suggested she had spent years standing in rooms where people watched her every move and she had learned to give them nothing unnecessary. She held a manila envelope in both hands. "My name is Vivienne Okafor-Saint Clair," she said. "I think we should talk." Dorian looked at the envelope, then at her. "I don't know you." "No," she said, "but I know enough about you, and I have a proposal that I think is worth 10 minutes of your time." She glanced at the courthouse steps behind him. "Not here, though. There's a cafe on 99th that's quiet in the mornings." He should have said no. Any reasonable person would have said no. He said yes. She ordered him a coffee without asking what he wanted. It arrived black, which was exactly how he took it. He chose not to find that unsettling. Vivienne wrapped both hands around her tea and looked at him across the table with the kind of directness that most people spent years trying to cultivate. "You were a site supervisor for Halverson Construction for 6 years," she said. "You were laid off 14 months ago when the Cloverdale project was canceled. You've been doing contract work since, mostly residential renovations, but nothing stable. You have a daughter. You're a good father." She paused. "You're also, by every measure I could find, someone who doesn't ask for help." "What kind of proposal?" Dorian said. She opened the envelope and slid 2 pages across the table. At the top in clean type, marriage contract, private agreement. Dorian did not touch the pages. He looked at her. "I need a husband," Vivienne said. "Specifically, I need a husband by the 14th of November, which is 11 weeks away. I need someone who will appear at 3 public events, 1 board dinner, and a family gathering in Kelowna. I need someone who is presentable, who will not embarrass me, and who will not ask questions I'm not ready to answer." She took a sip of her tea. "In exchange, I'm prepared to offer a monthly arrangement, access to legal support for your custody case, and a full-time position at Okafor-Saint Clair Developments once the arrangement ends." Dorian looked down at the pages then. He was quiet for a moment. "Why me?" he said. Vivienne set her cup down. For the first time, something moved behind her eyes, something that wasn't calculation. "Because," she said, "I had someone research people who were in the courthouse on Monday, family court matters. I asked for someone who had never made the news for the wrong reasons, who had no history of violence, no financial fraud, and no particular reason to use this against me later." She looked at him, steadily. "You came up, and then I read more about you than I'd planned to. What did you read? That your wife left. That you didn't fight dirty. That when the custody arrangement was proposed, you agreed to every term she asked for, even though your lawyer told you not to." Vivienne's voice didn't change, but she looked at him with something that might have been respect. A man who behaves decently when it costs him something, those are harder to find than people think. Dorian was quiet. Outside it had begun to rain, the soft, relentless kind of Edmonton October rain that didn't hurry, just settled in for the long term. "What's the real reason?" he said. "Not the research. What's actually happening?" Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. "My company is up for a federal infrastructure contract," she said. "One of the largest in Western Canada. The selection committee meets in November. There are 2 members of that committee who have made it very clear, not in writing, never in writing, that they have concerns about a single woman running a firm of this size, about stability, about judgment." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have built this company over 18 years. I have 260 employees. My financials are better than any of my competitors, and my safety record is the best in the province." She said it without heat, the way people say things they have had to say too many times. I am not going to lose this contract because two men in a boardroom in Ottawa have opinions about my personal life. Dorian turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. I have a daughter, he said. Every other week she's with me. If I do this, she's part of it. I know, Vivienne said. And she's 6. She doesn't lie well. She'll say things. For the first time, something shifted in Vivienne's expression, something that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. I'm counting on that, she said quietly. Children make things look real. Dorian didn't answer right away. He was thinking about Zara, about the way she'd held his hand in the parking lot that morning, when Patrice had picked her up, tighter than usual, like she was trying to tell him something she didn't have words for yet. He was thinking about the custody lawyer he couldn't fully afford and the lease deposit he'd been putting off, and the way his cousin's spare room had a single window that faced a fence. He was thinking that he was a man who had spent his whole adult life building things, houses, structures, frameworks meant to hold weight, and that he had just watched the one he'd built for himself get dismantled piece by piece in a courtroom. I need to think about it, he said. Of course, said Vivienne. She slid a card across the table. I need an answer by Friday. She left a 50 on the table for 2 cups of tea and 1 coffee, and she walked out into the rain without an umbrella, which was the first thing about her that surprised him genuinely. He called her on Thursday, not Friday. She didn't comment on that. They met with their respective lawyers in a boardroom on Jasper Avenue. The contract was 22 pages. Dorian read every one. His lawyer, a quiet, precise woman named Bertrand who he'd found through his cousin's neighbor, told him afterward that it was one of the more comprehensive private agreements she'd seen. She's protecting herself, Bertrand said. But she's protecting you too. He signed it on a Thursday afternoon in early October, and when he walked out of the building, the sky was doing that thing it sometimes does in Alberta in autumn, turning a shade of orange that felt almost unreasonable, like the sky was trying too hard. He called Zara on the drive home. She was at Patrice's. She told him at considerable length about a documentary she'd watched about the Cretaceous period and then asked him what he was doing. Starting something new, he said. Like a project? Sort of. Is it a house? Not exactly. She was quiet for a moment with the particular quality of silence that meant she was deciding whether to push further. Then, Gerald says hi. Tell Gerald hi back, Dorian said, and for the first time since Monday morning, something in his chest loosened enough to let him breathe. He met Vivienne's world in stages, the way you let your eyes adjust to a new kind of light. First was the townhouse in Glenora. Hers, immaculate, with high ceilings and bookshelves that went floor to ceiling, and a kitchen that looked like it'd been designed by someone who took cooking seriously. She showed him which drawer held the coffee, which side of the closet was cleared for him, where she kept the schedule of events they needed to appear at together. I don't need you to perform, she said, standing in the kitchen the first evening, pouring herself a glass of water. I just need you to be present, consistent. If people ask questions, keep the answers short. We met through mutual connections in the industry. We took our time, we're private people. That's mostly true, Dorian said. She looked at him. The private part, he said. A beat. Then she set down her glass. Yes, she said. That part is completely true. The first event was a dinner at a hotel in downtown Edmonton. The kind of event where the table settings cost more than Dorian's monthly grocery budget, and everyone in the room seemed to know each other from somewhere else. He wore a suit he'd bought on short notice at a place on White Avenue, and he stood next to Vivienne and shook hands and answered questions with the kind of calm he'd developed over years of managing construction sites where things went wrong and since someone had to not panic. He was good at not panicking. What he hadn't expected was that Vivienne was funny. Not in an obvious way, not the kind of funny that performs itself. But when a man in a very expensive jacket made a comment about the procurement process that was meant to sound humble and landed as the opposite, she leaned slightly toward Dorian and said something under her breath that was so precisely accurate that he had to press his lips together to keep from laughing. He looked at her. She was already looking somewhere else, perfectly composed. On the drive home, she said, "You did well. You're funnier than I expected," he said. She was quiet then. "Most people don't notice. Most people aren't paying the right kind of attention," he said. She didn't answer. But she looked out the window, and something in her face was different for a moment. Open, briefly, the way a window opens and closes before you're sure you saw it. Zara arrived on the first Friday of the arrangement with Gerald tucked under her arm and a very serious expression. She stood in the front hallway of Vivienne's townhouse and looked at the ceiling, and then the bookshelves, and then at Vivienne, in that order. "You have a lot of books," she said. "I do," said Vivienne. "Do you read them all?" "I've read most of them." Zara considered this. Which ones haven't you read? Vivienne walked to the shelves and pointed to the top row. Those ones. They were my mother's. I keep them because they were hers, not because I've read them. Zara absorbed this with the gravity it deserved. My dad keeps a hat that was my grandpa's, even though he doesn't wear hats, she said. That makes sense to me, said Vivienne. Zara nodded, apparently satisfied. Then she went to find out if the kitchen had apple juice, which it did, because Dorian had mentioned it on Wednesday, and Vivienne had put it on her grocery list without saying anything about it. Dorian noticed. He didn't say anything either. That weekend, Zara asked Vivienne 47 questions. Dorian counted. He wasn't sure why. He wasn't sure what he was counting toward. Vivienne answered all 47. On Sunday evening, when Dorian was buckling Zara into the car seat for the drive back to Patrice's, Zara said very quietly, "She seems lonely." Dorian paused with his hand on the buckle. "What makes you say that?" Zara shrugged in the way 6-year-olds shrug when they know something they can't fully explain. "She smiles like she's remembering how," she said. Dorian drove home thinking about that for a long time. There are things that happen in shared spaces that no contract accounts for. Like the Tuesday evening in mid-October when Dorian came back from a site visit to find Vivienne sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread across every surface and a mug of tea gone cold at her elbow, and she looked up at him with an expression he recognized. The look of someone who has been fighting a particular battle for so long they've forgotten what it felt like not to be fighting it. He didn't say anything. He made 2 cups of tea, put one in front of her, moved 3 of the stacks of paper to make room on the other side of the table, and sat down. She looked at him. "You don't have to, I know," he said. "What's the problem?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned one of the documents toward him. He leaned forward and read it. It was a clause in the federal procurement framework. Something about residency and principal business operations that had implications for a company like hers that did work across 3 provinces. He thought about it. "Pull the Alberta incorporation documents," he said, "and the registered address. If you designate the Edmonton office as primary operations rather than the Vancouver one, you satisfy the clause and it doesn't affect your provincial contracts." Vivienne stared at him. "I spent 6 years managing project compliance for a construction firm," he said. "I read a lot of contracts." She sat with that for a moment, then she said, "Why do you do that? Do what?" "Offer solutions. You could have just handed me the tea and gone to bed." Dorian looked at her. There was something in the question that wasn't quite a question. More like someone reaching for something and not being sure it would be there. "Because you're sitting at a table working on a problem and I happen to know the answer," he said. "That's not a complicated reason." Vivienne's was very still for a moment. Then she said, "My ex-husband used to call me a machine, said I was built for boardrooms, not relationships." She said it without self-pity, almost clinically, the way you describe a weather pattern. "He wasn't entirely wrong. I'm not particularly easy to be around." "I've been around," Dorian said. "It's been fine." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she gathered the papers and began reorganizing them with renewed purpose. And if her hands were steadier than they'd been an hour earlier, neither of them mentioned it. The trouble arrived in the 3rd week of October the way trouble tends to, through the back door, quiet before you know you need to be watching for it. His name was Philip Morrow. He was on the board of Okafor-Saint Clair Developments, had been there for 6 years, and had spent at least 4 of those years positioning himself for a role that Vivienne had built specifically to never need filling by someone like him. He had the kind of face that looked trustworthy in press photos. He had the kind of smile that appeared in rooms full of the right people and disappeared when they weren't watching. Dorian learned about him the way you learn about most threats, from the secondary sources. One of Vivienne's senior staff, a calm woman named Portia who managed the development portfolio, stopped Dorian in the parking garage one evening and said, "You seem like someone who notices things. I'm going to tell you something and you're going to be careful with it." What Portia told him was this. Philip had been quietly meeting with 2 of the federal committee members. Not about the contract officially, about golf, about a shared investment interest in a resort development in the Okanagan, about nothing that could be put in writing. "He's not trying to take the contract," Portia said. "He's trying to take the company," Dorian told Vivienne that evening. He watched her face go through something complicated and end somewhere quiet and hard. "I know," she said. "You know, I've known for about 8 months." She set her pen down on the desk and looked up at him. There must be something, or he wouldn't be moving this openly. Dorian thought about it. "You had a previous marriage?" "Yes. What ended it?" Vivienne was still for a moment. Then, He found out I'd been pregnant before we met, a relationship in my late 20s. I was 28, the relationship ended badly, and I was pressured by my family to give the baby up. She said it simply, the way people say things they have had to survive. My ex-husband didn't take it well. Not because of the child, he said. Because I hadn't told him. He told Philip. He and Philip went to graduate school together. Dorian was quiet, so Philip has something on you. He has a story. Whether he has documentation, I don't know. What he has is the threat of it, a female CEO who gave up a child. It doesn't matter what the circumstances were. It would be run through every filter available, and it would come out looking like something it wasn't. The child, Dorian said carefully. Do you know where she is? Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. Her hands were very still on the desk. Her name is Wren, she said. She would be 22 now. I've been looking for 4 years. A pause. I have a private investigator. There are layers of closed adoption records and legal complications, and it moves very slowly. Her voice, for the first time since he'd known her, had something in it that was less than controlled. Not quite grief, but what lives in grief's neighborhood. I think about her every day. I don't talk about it. Why not? Because the moment I talk about it, it becomes a liability, she said. That's what they've made it. Dorian sat across from her and said nothing for a moment. He was thinking about Zara, about how he'd felt in the courthouse on that Monday morning, the particular weight of knowing that something irreplaceable was partly out of your hands. He couldn't have carried that weight silently for 4 years. He genuinely didn't know how she had. Tell me everything Philip has access to, he said. Board documents, communication channels, shared vendor relationships, everything. Vivienne looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Why, she said. Because you're not the only one who can read a contract, he said. And because if he's been using board channels to build something, there's a paper trail. There's always a paper trail. They worked on it for 11 days. Dorian borrowed an approach he'd used on construction sites when he needed to trace a structural problem. Start with what you know is solid and work outward toward what's failing. He went through 6 months of board meeting minutes, vendor correspondence, and financial disclosure documents that Vivienne's lawyer quietly made available. He made a map on the kitchen table, literal sticky notes and printed pages arranged in a sequence, and Portia came by twice and added what she knew. And Vivienne sat across from him on the third evening and said quietly, You built something. I see it differently than you do, he said. You've been inside it. I came from outside. That's the advantage, she said. That's always the advantage, he said. What they found was not dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. A series of small, careful movements over 2 years that, taken individually, meant nothing, and taken together, meant Philip had been building a case to suggest that Vivienne's personal life made her a flight risk as CEO. Not a scandal, just a pattern. A story told in omissions. Vivienne's lawyer took it to the board chair, quietly. The way you do things when you want them to actually work. Philip resigned from the board 3 days before the federal committee meeting in November. The announcement cited personal reasons and wished Okafor-Saint Clair Developments well. Vivienne texted Dorian at 11:47 in the morning, It's done. He was on a site visit when he got it, a residential renovation in Strathcona, a kitchen gut and rebuild, the kind of work he could do in his sleep and that kept his hands from going idle. He read the text twice. Then he put his phone back in his pocket and went back to work and tried not to think about what it's done meant for everything else. The contract had an end date. They both knew it. They had both always known it. The federal committee met on a Tuesday. Vivienne was in Ottawa for 2 days. She called him on Wednesday evening from her hotel room, and Dorian was in the kitchen at the townhouse making dinner. Pasta, because Zara had requested it and then promptly fallen asleep on the couch before he finished, the way children do, instantly and completely, like a switch being thrown. How did it go, he said. I don't know yet. We'll hear next week. A pause. How's Zara? Asleep on the couch with Gerald. A longer pause. She found a book on the shelf last weekend, one of my mother's. She asked if she could borrow it. She didn't tell me that. She said she wasn't sure you'd let her because it was old and she might damage it. Another pause. I told her books are meant to be read. I told her to take it. Dorian leaned against the counter. Through the doorway, he could see Zara curled on the couch, one hand tucked under her cheek, Gerald tucked under her arm, completely untroubled. She asked me something, Vivienne said. What did she? She asked if I was going to keep looking for someone, she said. Vivienne stopped, started again. She said, You've been looking a long time. You shouldn't stop. She said it like it was obvious, like she'd figured something out. Dorian didn't say anything for a moment. She knew, he said finally. Children always know, Vivienne said quietly. He thought about Zara saying she smiles like she's remembering how. He thought about the 47 questions and the apple juice in the fridge, and the way Vivienne had looked at Zara's drawing on the kitchen table. A crooked green dinosaur with a very large head that Zara had titled Triceratop. She has 3, with an expression that lasted only a second before she put it back to, careful. The arrangement ends in 2 weeks, Vivienne said. I know, said Dorian. The position at the company is still yours if you want it. Site development coordination. It's real. I had it on hold before any of this. Portia put it together. That's not what I'm thinking about, he said. Silence. What are you thinking about, she said. I'm thinking that you've spent 4 years looking for someone, he said. And you've been so careful about protecting yourself that you've built the walls pretty solid. And I understand why. And I'm also thinking that. He stopped, found the words. I'm thinking that I came into this with nothing to lose, which, it turns out, is the best possible position to be in for saying true things. Dorian. I'm not performing, he said. That's the thing. I haven't been performing since about the 3rd week. A very long silence. I found her, Vivienne said. Her voice had changed last Thursday. My investigator called. Wren. She lives in Nelson, BC. She's a teacher. She knows she was adopted. The investigator says she's been open to contact. She stopped. I haven't called yet. I've been scared, Dorian said. Yes, that's a reasonable thing to be scared of. I don't. She stopped again. I don't know how to do this. The contract, the company, the strategy. That I know. This you figure out as you go, he said. You call her, or you write. You tell her the truth about what happened. You give her room to do whatever she needs to do with it, and whatever happens, at least you'll be on the other side of not knowing. Silence. Then, very quietly, you make it sound possible. It is possible, he said. It's just hard. Those aren't the same thing. He heard her exhale deliberate than that. The sound of a person putting something down that they've been holding for a very long time. Come home, he said, then realized what he'd said. I mean, I know what you mean, Vivienne said. Not the voice she used in boardrooms or at dinner tables or across contracts. Something older and quieter and more real. Thursday, she said. My flight gets in at 4. I'll make sure there's tea, he said. On the Wednesday evening, Zara was doing her homework at the kitchen table when she looked up at Dorian and said, without any preamble, Is Vivienne going to stay? Dorian looked up from the renovation plans he was reviewing. What makes you ask that? Zara shrugged. Gerald thinks she should. What do you think? Zara looked at him with the particular steadiness that children deploy when they are certain of something and are waiting for the adults to catch up. She's been looking a long time, she said. You shouldn't stop looking for people. Dorian looked at his daughter for a moment. Then he said, Yeah, I think Gerald's right. Vivienne called Wren on a Friday morning in November, the week after the committee announced that Okafor-Saint Clair Developments had been awarded the contract. She sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. Dorian had taken Zara to school, an ordinary Tuesday morning errand that had somehow become, over 11 weeks, a thing that happened without discussion, a small ordinary part of a life being built from unlikely materials. The phone rang 3 times. Then a voice said, Hello? And Vivienne, who had spent 18 years building a company on the strength of knowing exactly what to say in every room, opened her mouth and for a moment had nothing, just the sudden, overwhelming smallness of a woman holding a phone and the impossible distance between 2 people and the hope which was all she had. That distance could be crossed. Hi, she said. My name is Vivienne. I believe I'm your mother. Later, Dorian would remember the afternoon she told him how it went, sitting on the front steps of the Glenora townhouse in the thin November light, the kind of cold that settles into Alberta in November and means business. Zara inside, doing something involving construction paper and an unreasonable amount of tape. Vivienne sat with her tea between her hands and said that the call had lasted 2 hours, that Wren had asked good questions and had not been cruel, that there would be more conversations and it would take time, and nothing was resolved, but the door was open. She sounds like someone I would have raised, Vivienne said. Then caught herself. That sounds like... No, Dorian said, it doesn't. It sounds exactly like what it is. Vivienne looked out at the street. November in Edmonton had stripped the trees bare and flattened the light, and in that light she looked not like the woman who had handed him a contract in a cafe 6 weeks ago, but like someone he had been slowly coming to know. The real version, the one underneath the posture and the strategy, the one that his 6-year-old daughter had apparently identified inside of 3 minutes. The contract officially ended yesterday, Vivienne said. I know. You could move out, I know. A pause. Do you want to? She said. He looked at her. No, he said, not particularly. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't know how to do this. An actual version of this, neither do I, he said. I was married for 9 years and I still don't know how to do it. I think that might be the whole point. You don't know how and you do it anyway. She looked at him with something that had been building for weeks, something that had been careful and controlled and was now very quietly. Not. I made a very calculated decision when I found you, she said. I researched you. I had a plan, I know. And then you sat down at that kitchen table with sticky notes and you helped me build something and you made tea on a Tuesday night and your daughter asked me 47 questions and she stopped. It got away from me. Yeah, Dorian said. Me too. Inside, through the front window, they could hear Zara, some kind of construction project from the sound of it. Gerald was probably involved. Something was being taped to something else with great intention. The tea thing, Dorian said. That was a good sign, apple juice in the fridge, for Zara, the first weekend. Vivienne looked at him. You didn't say anything about it, she said. I noticed. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, I noticed a lot of things I didn't plan to notice. The November light flattened out across the street, and somewhere inside the house, something made of construction paper achieved whatever it had been trying to become. And Zara said yes in the particular tone of someone who has finished a thing and is satisfied, and on the front steps of a house in Edmonton, Alberta, 2 people sat in the cold and let themselves be exactly where they were.